Hello, folks. This is your host, Tammy Tuckey, and you are now listening to the Tiara Talk Show. We bring you rare interviews with the makers of Disney magic. Whether they be singers, actors, Imagineers, animators, they have all made their mark on the Disney name. Be sure to check out the show notes, other episodes, contests, our social media pages from Facebook to Twitter, and more on our official website at www.thetiaratalkshow.com. All guest opinions are theirs and theirs alone and do not represent the opinions of the Tiara Talk Show or the host. The Tiara Talk Show is not associated with the Disney Company. Thank you for tuning into this week's episode. And from all of us here at the Tiara Talk Show, have a hoop-de-doo day. Excited to welcome this week's Tiara Talk Show guest, animator Carole Holliday, to the show. Welcome, Carole.
Hi, Tammy. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for asking and for coming on the show. I know we were talking a little bit off air. I had found out about your work through a Goofy Movie behind the scenes featurette on YouTube, and I was like, well, who is Carole? I'd love to have her on the show, so here we are.
Thank you. And it's funny that you should mention the Goofy Movie, because that was, I believe, the first movie that I actually did storyboards on, and I have been a storyboard artist since then. I was only an animator for a little bit of time, and even that just kind of training animator, but my heart has always been a story heart. And so eventually, you know, God was like, you're supposed to be a storyboard artist. So that is the direction I ended up going. So, yeah.
It was really interesting to find that you were a graduate of CalArts. So can you talk a little bit about how you kind of entered the animation industry?
Well, I was originally, my mother was an artist, and, you know, she said when we were born that basically we took all the art with us. And so I'm very thankful for her, her sacrifice in having children and having children who were artistic. But that being said, she didn't want us to starve. So, she was hoping that if she overdid me on the arts, then I would decide to go do something more practical. So, you know, her and my stepmom and dad, you know, had me in dance and tried to get me in piano and in acting, and it sort of all backfired. It actually made me want to be a performer even more. But I was going to go into theater initially because I sing, so I wanted to be in musical theater. But then I became a Christian, and I thought I was going to have to compromise too much of what I believed, and I had always drawn. So I went to the animation department and I talked to the dean, and he said, and I said basically that, well, God wants me in animation. And he said, but you can't draw. And so he gave me some advice. He told me to go out and do some quick sketches. And so I did. I went out and did quick sketches, and I came back the next week, and he was like, well, go do some more. So this went on for like 3 weeks. And finally, he said, well, you still can't draw, but we'll let you in on your enthusiasm. So, yes, God wanted me in animation, and that's how I got in there. And I had been talking to a friend when I was in the theater department. He was in animation, and I would go visit the animators, you know, every time I had the opportunity. And so he asked me what I did during the day, and I'd, you know, done some, you know, acting exercises or whatnot. And I asked what he did, and he said, well, Chuck Jones came to speak to us. And I was like, oh, Chuck Jones? Chuck Jones came? And he said, you know who Chuck Jones is? I said, yeah, he did the Grinch, and he did the Tom and Jerry's. And he's like, get out of animation. Get out of acting. There is no reason why you should know that and not be an animator. You know, so I just, you know, I had always loved drawing and always had loved animation. But I also like performing too. So, you know, animation and storytelling is a combination of the two. You know, as the saying goes, you know, animators are an actor with a pencil. So, you know, I just happen to be a more gregarious and external person, but I still love to do the drawing stuff, which is behind the scenes.
And the acting comes to play here because you did some background voices for a Goofy movie and were also a storyboard artist. So can you further elaborate on what specific voices you got to do for the film?
Well, that was just like they needed somebody to do a line. Goofy movie was the first time that I ever did something. I've since done scratch voices for other things because I like to perform. But Goofy movie was just, they needed, actually, I think the first one I ever did was in Oliver and Company, where I was a workout instructor. And that was in, I think when Georgette is doing some workouts and there's like somebody on the TV in the background, so it's really quiet. And then in the Goofy movie, they just needed a line. They needed 2 lines. And one of them, because it was kind of a Kmart kind of store, they needed someone to say, Goofy, line 1, Goofy, line 1, because they had to get a phone call. And then there was another one that was, blue light special on aisle 2, or whatever it was, so they just needed somebody to do like a throwaway voice. So it wasn't, crazy acting chops. It was, are you not going to freeze up in front of a microphone?
Yeah, sometimes it can be really scary. And I have to mention another one of my favorite projects that you got to work on was Tarzan. I love how you got the chance to continue these characters' stories through sequels and the TV show, which I loved.
It was funny because by the time Tarzan had ended, on the same floor as the development artists, and they're coming up with the design. I actually worked, coming out of the Goofy movie, there was a little bit of a downtime where Kevin had a crew at Disney TV. Initially, Tarzan was going to be done at Disney TV. And so we had a little crew there. So I did some early designs for Tarzan and Jane and whatnot. And then the project got moved over to Disney Feature Animation. And so I got put into story. So you work on a project for 3 years. Worked on a project for 3 years. And at the end, the movie came out. And I'm like, oh, that's how you draw Tarzan. And so getting onto the Tarzan TV show, it's like, I finally feel like I can draw this character. And it was, exciting coming from Disney feature animation is different from Disney TV animation in as the story process in feature animation is you're actually coming up with story. We do work with script people, but we do a lot of our own writing. At one point, one of the early writers of Tarzan, had come into a meeting with the story people, and we were discussing the Strangers Like Me sequence that eventually Glenn Keane would go ahead and storyboard and do this amazing job with. But at the end of the meeting, he said to the director, wow, those artists actually have story sense. And so, our job as storyboard artists is not just to make pretty pictures, it's to actually help the director achieve his vision beginning to end. And we may be responsible for smaller chunks in the film, or larger chunks. But then TV animation is different because it has to move so quickly. There is no 3 years on a show. There is 6 weeks from start to finish on an entire show that you're boarding. And the first 3 weeks of that is spent doing the roughs. The second 3 weeks is spent applying the corrections the director makes as well as cleaning it up. So it was learning a new discipline of not only telling story, but telling the story that was there and helping enhance that. And so while I couldn't change story issues, what they liked about me on that show was that since I did have an animation background, when you work in TV, you're given an actual cut together radio play. So you are acting out the what the characters are already saying. You're hearing the voices and you're acting that out. So they really enjoyed the fact that I could bring in some acting to the boards because it was going to be sent overseas. So those were sort of different beasts. One was telling a story with acting, and the other one was telling the story that's already there.
And then you become a director for Mickey's Twice Upon a Christmas, which I loved. I had it on VHS tape. So what was it like getting that call to ask you to be a director for this specific project?
There is never an opportunity. There's never a chance when somebody calls you and says, would you like to be a director? A director in its very nature has to be a self-starter, kind of an initiator person. So, I would go in and say like, hey, how about me? and I actually had a friend, as a matter of fact, a friend of mine who I adore. And she was a development executive at Disney at the time. And one day we went out to lunch and she's like, Carole, what do you want to do? And, just being a friend. And I was like, I guess I want to direct. And she's like, do you want to or not? Because you have to be, certain if you do. And I said, yeah, I want to direct. I guess, and I couldn't work up the courage to actually say that that's what I wanted to do, So it would take me a couple more years to finally to say, this is what I want. And, I went and spoke with one woman who was producing a feature, and she was willing to take me on, even though I had no experience. Well, because I had expressed an interest, they said, we're going to do this compilation of Mickey cartoons, and you have the option to, present anything you want as a story idea, or you can choose one of ours. And I looked at their story ideas and nothing really grabbed me. And I said, so I can come up with anything. So I had wanted to do a story, even though it was tongue in cheek, I wanted to do a story where A, Donald Duck broke up with Daisy, after I think it was 70 years of being together, and B, he killed Santa Claus. And even though it wasn't going to be real Santa Claus, I wanted Donald's rage to drive him to the point where he was going to lose everything, but then he would get everything back. Because that is the story I love to tell, is just a perpetual redemption story. People suffering the consequences of their wrong, but then finding hope. So I pitched the story kind of inspired by, ironically, a movie that Denzel Washington was in called Fallen, where this demon was being sort of passed around by touch. And instead, it was a Christmas song that Donald didn't want to hear that was being sung by everybody. So it drove him mad. And he ends up losing everything. But then he finds, retribution and redemption. He finds redemption by actually realizing Christmas is not about him, and that's about the people that he loves. So they liked the idea and they gave me the opportunity to story direct it. Although Matt O'Callahan took care of everything in the bigger sense, I got to work with a crew. I got to, decide on the art direction for my sequence. And it was a really wonderful experience.
And recently you've been promoting your new book, The Food Ain't the Problem, with tips for staying and eating healthy, along with some fun drawings you've made. What was the inspiration to writing this book? And also, how have your fans been reacting to it?
Thank you for asking and bringing that up. And initially, if anybody has seen any video behind the scenes things of me, I was a very, very large person. And I know there's this whole body acceptance push now, which is great, but I realized as a Christian, I was allowing food to control me, and nothing should control me but God. So I started working on that aspect of just allowing God to control me and eating just enough. And I found out at that point, oh my gosh, God is not some horrible ogre who's like saying you have to deny yourself. He's just saying don't make food a god. And so he'd made all this wonderful food that I could enjoy in moderation, and it made me just adore him even more. So I would start writing things on Facebook or on blog posts, just like little things about how awesome God was and how he was changing my life in regards with the food and whatnot. Well, after about 3 years and 120 plus pounds lost, my friends were like, you should write a book. And I ended up deciding to write the book. And my friends were like, well, you're an artist, you should draw. And I'm like, in my mind, cartoons and God did not go together. Because you look at, all these beautiful paintings by Rubens or whoever, where they do these lofty images of God. My little scratchy cartoons didn't seem to fit. But it ended up fitting even better because I realized in the course of doing it that God saves everyone. He doesn't just save the amazing people. He saves the cartoonist and the clown. And so my cartoons ended up figuring in very largely into the book, as well as the tone of the book. It tends to be a little bit more tongue-in-cheek and lighthearted, as opposed to, it's thou shalt not, but thou shalt not with warmth and love, which is what God is. So that's where the book came from. It was just basically a testimony of what God had done in my life and helped me change my weight. I don't do a lot of videos, but I end up doing videos for the book, and I can tell a beginning, a middle, and end of a story because of everything I learned in the course of being a storyteller through Disney films. And so I'm very thankful for that experience. And I'm looking forward to more experiences, whether it's with Disney or DreamWorks or whatever, branching out and hopefully doing actually more feature directing. I would love to direct a feature, so I'm working towards that goal. But just being a storyteller on a crew. I love working with crews. I love working the ideas that you bounce off of each other and just growing from seeing other people's, wow, I wouldn't have thought of doing it that way. That's an amazing way of accomplishing that picture that you're doing right there. It's been a wonderful experience, and I've learned so much from so many people. It just continues to make me build as an artist.
And I also want to mention to our audience that they can purchase a copy of The Food Ain't the Problem on Amazon. The link is below in the show notes. And you can follow Carole on Facebook at facebook.com/The Food Ain't the Problem, and on Instagram at It Ain't the Food. And before we close our interview, I have 3 Disney-themed questions I always ask our guests. I call them the Fab 3. So we'll start with the Donald one, which is, as a child, what Disney film was one of your favorites to see in the movie theater?
Oh my goodness, my favorite, and I'm glad you asked that question. My favorite one was 101 Dalmatians. I loved Roger. I wanted to grow up and marry Roger. But yeah, I just loved everything about that film. I loved the animation. I loved just the little nuances that they put in there. And as I got older and got into animation, I mean, like one of my favorite scenes, of Roger coming down the stairs and he's backing Anita against the wall. And she looks over her shoulder real quick to see how close she is to the wall. Now, I know they were doing, photo reference, but the fact that the artist chose to include that in there just gave it a sense of reality that just was just so moving to me, kind of a Marlon Brando sort of, method-y type of acting thing that I love to put in my storyboards. It's like, it's not just a character moving from point A to point B. It's how that character lives in that world that they're moving through.
And our goofy question, what Disney character do you think would be your best friend if you met them in person?
Oh, golly. Probably Minnie Mouse. My friends are all the sort of the cheerful encouragers, and that's kind of what I see Minnie Mouse as. And so, because I'm the blabbermouth.
And finally, our Mickey question, if I asked you to name any Disney song at this very moment, what immediately comes to mind?
When You Wish Upon a Star. And it's that idea that dream can come true. It's not just wishing, it's actually pursuing it. And I love that. Your conscience, here's that little conscience.
Yes, it's definitely one of my favorite Disney songs in the repertoire. And I have to thank you so much for coming on the show, and maybe you could sing us out with a little When You Wish Upon a Star.
When you wish upon a star, makes no difference who you are, anything your heart desires will come to you. If your heart is in your dreams, no